All right, the clock has struck 12:02 in Tallahassee, Florida for me. So we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of respecting y'all's time. Thrilled to be connected with you all. My name is Jamie Francis, and I am joined by my colleague Nikki De Silva today. Nikki and I have the pleasure of supporting the TPM National Learning Network, those who are TPM practitioners all across the country and beyond. And we are very excited to have an opportunity to connect with you guys to discuss our upcoming TPM Academy. This session is being recorded, as we had a lot of folks let us know that they would not be able to join us live, and hope to get to watch and learn more later on. So just so that you all know, any questions that you have is going to be a part of the recording, but feel free to also include any questions that you may have as part of the chat. We definitely want to make the most of our time with you. So in the interest of that, we'll go ahead and show you what we plan to cover as part of today's webinar. I normally keep my camera off during these presentations because I find it helps connectivity, but just so that you can see that I am in fact a real live person and not any type of bot. Hi, nice to meet you all, but I'll go ahead and keep it off. What we plan to cover is to give you all a little background on talent pipeline management, as well as our TPM Academy, discuss what the national cohort experience looks like, particularly in this virtual world, and then walk you through our application process, what it is that we'll be looking for in applicants, and we'll make sure to leave time for questions. Again, if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, don't hesitate to use the chat feature. Nikki will be monitoring that, and then I can also bring them up to the entire group as we go throughout the presentation. But want to first start off with a little bit of background. I know some of you on the call who are very familiar with TPM, but for those who are less familiar, just to give you the 30,000-foot overview of what this initiative is really all about, is it finds its rooting in supply chain management. We at the Chamber Foundation, because of our close affiliation with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, our audience is often business, and supply chain management is a concept that they really gravitate towards, and it makes sense to them as they think about how can they better organize their supply chain so that they have a better product for their customers. In talent supply chains, we're taking that same concept, but applying it to people. And very quickly, I'm not trying to say that institutions of education are like factories, or that students or workers are like widgets. But in terms of really trying to add value to a person's education and training experience over time so that they do have a more seamless transition to employment, is what we're going for in talent pipeline management. So the images that you see before you starts with that kind of common imagery of supply chain management, where you're taking material and all along the way working with various partners until that product gets to the customer. And then in the second image, making that kind of similar imagery with a person. So how is it that you can connect to providers that are going to give you experiences with support services along the way that's going to add value to your education and training as you transition into employment to have better outcomes for the student and the worker, for the providers who are providing that service to the person, and then to the employer who is looking to fill a critical job. In the third image, what you're seeing is that concept that, employers are not always the best at communicating what our needs are. So we want to, through talent pipeline management, empower employers with their own information so that they can be sending the right signals, not just to the students and workers, but also to their provider partners of what do they really need. Again, to promote that concept of shared value. So this is really all about trying to overcome a communications challenge in so many ways. There's, of course, a lot more to it than that, in terms of, how TPM is different from other workforce development initiative approaches. There are a couple of principles that we find makes TPM stand out. We'll never claim that it's a silver bullet for every workforce challenge that you might be experiencing. But when it comes to talent and talent strategies, TPM is really built on industry best practices, not only supply chain management, that's where we have our deepest connection, but common processes and frameworks that really leverage the best of the best from industry directly. So whether that's Lean Six Sigma, or the way that we think about our demand planning approach, we're trying to gather all of that good information that exists and build on it and add value to it. But TPM truly is focused on employer return on investment. Return on investment can mean different things to different folks, but what we're looking for is for every partner in the value chain to have some type of positive outcome out of the TPM approach. But what employers really love about this is thinking about return on investment, trying to really target and hit at their deepest pain points, those things that keep them up at night, so that they will see positive returns in the end. This initiative is truly employer-led. So while we hear very commonly that approaches are demand-driven, when we usually unpack that more, what we're finding is limited employer interaction. So whereas employers are used to being one of many voices around a table, maybe as part of an advisory board, TPM truly puts the employers in the leadership control. And the reason for that is we find that it leads to more sustained and effective employer engagement. Whereas a lot of times what we see is that employers are a part of an initiative for a brief period of time, and then they usually take a step back when they're not realizing the type of return on investment that they were hoping to see. But if we have employers engaged and leading throughout the process, then that's much more likely to lead to long-term engagement and sustainability of these efforts. TPM, while it is a structured process that you guys will learn more about as part of the TPM Academy, it's also meant to be agile and to meet you where you're at. Some folks already have groups of employers coming together, or those previously mentioned advisory boards where there's an opportunity to get this group of employers together to oversee a process in which we're really trying to activate collective action and decision making with these employers. We do that through granular and actionable data that's driven from the employers themselves. So we're not relying on state labor market information or even real-time labor market information. We want it to come straight from the employers that are around the table taking part in this TPM initiative. Something else that really makes TPM stand out is the fact that we are agnostic when it comes to which talent sourcing partners you're working with. So we find that our partners are not only relying on the more traditional school systems of, high schools and community colleges, four-year institutions. Of course, they are very incredibly important partners, but we're also working with staffing agencies, with the military, with prison systems. So really trying to take a look at all of the talent sourcing opportunities that exist within our communities. And then finally, one of the things that I really love to talk about in TPM is this concept of shared value. So while this is an employer-led process, that doesn't mean that it's employer alone. There are a lot of partners that have to come together to make this framework work. And the great part about that is that there's a win in it for everybody. Students and workers have a better connections to employment opportunities and better outcomes overall. Providers have that opportunity to tout their programs and what they're offering to students and workers. Having it result in real authentic outcomes is something that is certainly a marker of a good provider partner. And then finally, for the employers themselves to be able to use this approach and target their pain points and having them be met with employer-led solutions is certainly something that we find a lot of employers are looking for. While there is the competitiveness nature to it, we're wanting to make sure that outcomes are really what we're all driving towards, and there's some healthy competition that comes into that. But what's nice about the TPM process is that everybody has accountability, they have their role to play, and what this process allows is for you to have a greater understanding and recognition of what your role is within the talent supply chain. TPM is based on these 6 strategies that you see before you, though my colleagues will always be very quick to point out that we have a very important strategy that's not necessarily part of this 6 strategy, and that's the TPM orientation. And the orientation is really a way to familiarize both yourself and your community with the TPM process to make sure that it's a good fit. So we start off with trying to help people understand what is TPM not, and where are the communities that TPM is most ripe for. Not only that, but then as we dive into the strategies, which industry is the right industry to start with in terms of implementing the framework. So this very first step is all about organizing your employer collaboratives and trying to go to those employers that are most ready and willing to take on this type of initiative. So those are commonly the ones who are hungry and wanting to participate in these conversations, because it's not an overnight solution. It is going to take work, particularly as we dive into the data collection phases of strategies 2 through 4, in which we're wanting to know what are your most critical jobs. Numbers shouldn't determine criticality, but they are certainly important because it's information that we're going to be sending to our provider partners as they think about the programs and services that they need to be providing to students and workers. Then once we have determined which jobs we're going to focus on, we then need to figure out how are we going to communicate those hiring requirements that are associated with these critical jobs. There is a lot of power that comes with shared language of a group from a group of employers when trying to prioritize what is really necessary for these critical jobs. What skills do folks need to come in with on day one? And then what are things that I, as the employer partner, are going to take care of in terms of my onboarding and training processes. Once we switch to strategy 4, in which we're analyzing talent supply, we're trying to figure out these basic questions of, well, where does your talent currently come from? Let's do this back mapping process so that we figure out where do we currently get our talent, and then start to identify, are there untapped providers within our network that we could be leveraging more so to meet the demand that we've identified in strategy 2. We'll also go through this process in which we're trying to figure out, based off of the working age population in our communities, are we able to really be able to kind of mirror what our working age populations in our communities look like? This is particularly helpful for employers that are focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and trying to make sure that we're representing our community at large, and trying to figure out, are there groups of folks that we're not including in the talent pipeline in a way that we should and would benefit from. Once we get to strategy 5, we get to bring in those provider partners. And I know that Nikki is addressing a question in the chat of what we mean by what we say when we are asking about providers. We're in this context really talking about folks that are adding value or providing services to students or workers. So that can be the more traditional education and training institutions, but it also could go beyond that in terms of staffing agencies or community-based nonprofits, others that are adding value or services to a person's kind of preparation for the workforce. So we want to start to bring those folks in strategy 5 and say, okay, we as employers have done our homework. Now we need to bring you all to the table so that we can co-design talent supply chain solutions. So as we said, this is not employer alone. We need those important partners at the table, but employers need that time as part of strategies 1 through 4 to get their information right. It's going to make them better partners as we get to this implementation phase. So in strategy 5, we'll not only be looking at, okay, who are the preferred providers that we're going to work with, but now we also need to figure out, how are we measuring success? What are those performance measures that are associated with the pain points that brought us together in the first place? How are we going to make sure that we're headed in the right direction with these solutions that we'll start to implement? And then in strategy 6, we're really going to dive into continuous improvement. We're not going to want to rest on our laurels of this is the way that things have always been done. No, now that we're measuring performance in strategy 5, we want to identify those places where we know that we can get better and figure out who are the right people to bring to the table to figure out ways that we're going to improve our talent supply chain solutions. What's very exciting about this particular cohort is that you all will be the first to really experience our enhanced TPM Academy curriculum. We've spent the last several months making adjustments based on practitioner feedback and a lot of things that we've learned from the field. So we'll be releasing that new curriculum next month. But this will be the first cohort that will get to experience it from beginning to finish. So we're very excited to dive into that with folks. But the TPM Academy curriculum is currently available, and I encourage you all to take a look at it as you go about filling out your application, so that you do feel that you have a general understanding of what TPM is. The TPM orientation is a really good resource for that, and it also includes a number of specific references to existing collateral that we have, such as videos and one-pagers to help give you that TPM 101. But hopefully that was a helpful starting place for you all in terms of what makes up the TPM framework and what it is that you all will experience as part of the Academy. So just to provide a little bit of historical context of, TPM is not something that has been created overnight. It's something that certainly has grown. And as I mentioned with the curriculum, it continues to get better because of the many people who have come before you, who have now gone through TPM academies and are implementing TPM in their states or in Canada. But this started with a white paper released about 6.5 years ago. And basically we put out a call to the ready and willing and say, who wants to test out what, was initially kind of a theory and put it to practice. So we had 7 business facing organizations stand up representing different industries and very different parts of the country and decided to test this out with us. And we learned a heck of a lot from those folks. And one of the greatest learning lessons that they, suggested to us was to say, hey, we've learned so much by going through this process together. You need more folks like us who are testing this out, because this is a dramatically different approach to what employers are used to when it comes to workforce development. We want to see more of this across the country because we think that it will ultimately benefit all of us. So we then started the TPM Academy in 2016. This will be the 17th cohort that we launch, which is pretty incredible given it's really only been about 4 years. But we have had the opportunity to stand up state-based academies as well as regional academies. But one thing that keeps coming up from so many of our partners all across the country is there needs to be more. We have a lot of folks who want to go through these academy experiences. When the pandemic came about last year, we certainly didn't want to stop the learning. So we decided to start to host them virtually while we were also going through a process of figuring out, where else can TPM be applied? We had already done a big revision to think about how TPM could not only be used for entry-level first-time positions. We also wanted to think about how it could be applied to career advancement opportunities and upskilling existing workers. As well as how could this be leveraged in the context of career and technical education partnerships, as well as for communities who are trying to leverage their opportunity populations, those who who traditionally experience barriers to education and training opportunities. So every time that we, bring in a new partner to the mix, we learn a little bit more from them and get to think about TPM in a slightly different way. The framework never really changes, but we build and we enhance our own learning to make the resources that we're able to offer to our National Learning Network better and better. So we're very excited for what's to come next with TPM. You'll see in 2020 that mention of TPM Next. It won't necessarily be called that forever, but basically what this will be is an online learning management system to help more folks be able to leverage the TPM offerings. And that's something that we always kind of look to our existing National Learning Network to help us do really well and effectively. So we'll have a prototype of that we're working on right now, and we'll likely have a soft launch of TPM Next by the end of this year. But we wouldn't necessarily suggest waiting until then. There are a lot of things that we need to do in terms of a development phase, but it's to come, and it's exciting, and it's something that our National Learning Network, those who have gone through the TPM Academy before, will be a big part of. So with that, a little bit more about the Academy experience itself. One of, I think, the greatest advantages of TPM, in addition to what makes it different, is the peer-to-peer networking that takes place. So while we have grown exponentially to a network of now over 400 folks implementing TPM across the country, we continue to see that they really like each other. They like connecting with one another. They like learning from one another, and they find that really helps benefit their own communities. So we really try to take advantage of peer-to-peer networking, giving you all opportunities to get to know your cohort, even in a virtual environment. And we've found some really cool ways to do that. But we've started an active online community through both Slack and LinkedIn. We often invite our colleagues to participate in your TPM Academy experience, again, even virtually. And leveraging the signature TPM Academy curriculum. So while that is something that's available to the public and always will be and should be, it's certainly something that becomes a lot more real as a part of the TPM Academy experience. As I mentioned, we like to involve your peers in not only in kind of getting to know one another and learning from their experiences, but as faculty themselves. So for every facilitation that we have, we'll include one of our existing TPM faculty members who is also a practitioner, and they can really help lend their expertise and their firsthand experiences implementing TPM in their own communities. And finally, a big distinguishing feature of participating in an academy is the access to our TPM web tool. Our web tool is completely customized to the TPM framework. It was started at the same time that we started the TPM Academy curriculum, and similarly to the curriculum, every time we make enhancements, learn something new, we then drive that learning into the TPM web tool in terms of what it offers. So this is something that helps automate and streamline a lot of that data collection that goes on in strategies 2 through 4. And then again, once we get to kind of actual implementation and trying to gauge and track performance measures. But this is something that is only available to TPM Academy participants versus the curriculum that is made available to the public. Lots of other implementation supports that come a part of this experience, but that web tool is a really great feature that we're glad that our colleagues are finding useful. In terms of what the calendar looks like, and we'll talk about the application process in just a slide or two. But this particular cohort's first meeting will take place on May 12th, in which we'll go over the orientation. We'll then meet again in June to dive into strategy 1 before meeting together again in July for strategies 2 through 4. In August, we'll meet for strategy 5, and then in September, we'll meet for strategy 6. These are more frequent trainings than what we typically do for in-person academies. And the reason being is that we know that folks get Zoom fatigue very quickly, and the virtual world is a little bit different. And our number one goal is to not sacrifice quality because we have transitioned to this virtual environment during this time when travel is still a little bit iffy. If anything, we think that this will really make for an incredible academy experience and have now had at least a year's worth of practice in which we've kind of figured out what is the right timing. Can we rely on folks' attention spans? So we've decided to go with this longer calendar, but I think that it really is going to help bring the theoretical part of TPM to potential application. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and what that means for the collaborative presentations that are mentioned for October. Just a little bit more information in terms of what participating in the TPM National Learning Network provides. And biannually, we bring together our National Learning Network for TPM summits, in which it's you and other TPM practitioners from all across the country coming together, either in person, which is what we usually do, or in a virtual environment, which is what will happen in 2021. But to tackle, TPM specific topics and to learn from our partners who have been practicing TPM for a while now on things that are most interesting to them, things that they think will help them with their TPM implementation. So we oftentimes will survey our colleagues to see which topics are of highest interest to them, and then determine which of our partners are going to speak on those topics as part of these summits. But we've gotten more than 150 folks representing every TPM Academy participate in the last couple of summits. And I am guessing that will continue just in terms of their popularity, but luckily the trends are in the right direction for us. You might see John Legend on the screen. He is not a TPM National Learning Network member, though that is a great idea, Nikki, that we should try to think about. But this was a presentation at our annual Talent Forward Workforce Conference, in which we get to see a lot of our TPM National Learning Network members participate in. We've usually been able to offer free registration for our TPM National Learning Network members. That's something that we certainly hope to continue in the future. And then we want to make sure that folks have an opportunity to touch base with us. So the TPM Academy experience is really just an introduction to, the National Learning Network experience that will go on forever. We like to say that once you're a part of the TPM family, you'll always be a part of the TPM family. And we find that even colleagues who leave their organizations want to stay in touch with us and get the quarterly webinar that we send out and participate in our quarterly newsletter and get the opportunity to participate in our webinars that we host as well, in which we just try to bring folks together, continue our learning of how to make our TPM projects better. We also started to do special topic webinars thanks to the request of our practitioners. So tomorrow, for instance, we'll host a webinar on implementing TPM in rural populations. For anybody who's interested in participating in that, by all means, please join us. We can include the registration information. We hosted a workshop for our healthcare practitioners last week that got a lot of popularity. So not only presentations from our existing practitioners, but then we split folks up into smaller working groups so that they could discuss how the challenges that healthcare is experiencing now and how TPM can be leveraged for that. We always like to bring our folks together when we're going through revisions of the curriculum or extensions of the curriculum. So I had mentioned our upskilling enhancements, our opportunity populations, and our career and technical education extensions. All of those were produced with the help of review committees who were more than half made up of National Learning Network practitioners. So as we said, we like to go to those that we know and who will really help us think about this from the lens of implementation. And that's something that we've really benefited from and the network as a whole has benefited from. And then finally, the National Learning Network is who we go to in terms of grooming and bringing in more faculty to teach TPM because the interest and the demand is there, as well as our TPM fellows. Those are our greatest leaders in the TPM network. There are a lot of folks across the country who are now a part of our fellows group, and they lend their mentorship and expertise to other network members to help them with their implementation. There was a question in the chat about a specific webinar for IT and cyber. We do not have one on the books, so that is one that keeps coming up. We did a spotlight on IT in our last summit that was hosted in May. And as Nikki is saying, we have a recording of that and we would be happy to share it. There was a lot of good conversation that came out of that one. I actually facilitated that one. And there were some great partners from San Diego and from Arizona who participated in that conversation. So we'd be glad to share that with you, Kiama, if that would be helpful to you. And again, we're always looking to our network to help us figure out what is going to be the next topic that we cover. So always an opportunity to put that on the future calendar. In terms of what we're looking for as we recruit this next cohort for our National Academy, the folks who are most commonly participating in TPM academies are on the left side of the screen. So state and local chambers of commerce, business associations, EDAs, folks who are representing businesses of all sizes, and then education, training, and service providers. If you don't consider yourself in one of those categories, that doesn't mean that you are excluded from the group, but we find that those are the ones who most commonly benefit from TPM. And that's really our job, is to make sure that we're setting folks up for success, both in going
Can you all hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, great. This is Nikki. Jamie may have jumped off because of her internet for a second, so I can kind of take over and go from here, and just bear with me while I bring up the slide deck. But what Jamie was discussing was just some of the different types of people that might participate in an academy. Typically it is kind of state or local chambers of commerce, might be economic development organizations or other types of workforce intermediaries that would play those roles. But we have also had, and this
I'll get mine pulled up as well, just to pick up where we left off. I don't know if we got through the rest of these bullets on the previous screen, which was just not only your ability to participate in the trainings themselves, but also what we call the employer collaborative project. And what this is all about is, again, trying to help you all take TPM from theory to actual implementation. So we want to give you a test run, and we'll actually set you all up into groups to walk through the TPM process as your own collaborative. So thinking about data collection and figuring out what your focus is going to be, and starting to play with some ideas in terms of solutions that you would want to implement in your community. We've now done this before with a virtual cohort, and it worked fantastically well. And I think will really help you in terms of taking that next step once you go through the Academy process, and really being able to implement TPM in your communities. The other thing that we're looking for is the tuition, which for a virtual academy is $2,000, as well as a written statement of support from your CEO, or if you happen to be the CEO yourself, from your board chair, because we want to make sure that your leadership understands the TPM implementation and knows what benefits it's going to provide to your community. We want to make sure that in order for you to really be able to participate, make the most of the training, and dedicate the time that it takes, that you do have that buy-in from your leadership. So if we switch to the next slide, just in terms of giving you guys an idea of your the selection process, what we're going to be looking for in our Academy participants. We'll look for a maximum of 30 participants to be a part of this particular cohort. We'll want to make sure that those who are applying kind of meet up for the, meet the selection criteria that you can see on this particular screen, the 4 areas of evaluation. So we want to make sure that your organization is one that would be able to make the use of the training and really understand what TPM is, what it's meant to do, because again, we're not trying to throw any false ideas out there of what TPM intends to do for a community. We don't want folks thinking that this is going to change things overnight. So to really understand what the framework is, how it's going to add value to your community, and then what is the feasibility for you to take actions. Some of this is based off of the strength of your partnerships in your communities. So those are all questions that we'll have as part of the application process. And then Nikki, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, just to give you an idea of what it's going to look like when you get to the application. We do require a signature. In fact, we won't actually evaluate an application until we see that you have that signature, that you do understand what the commitment of participating in the Academy is as part of this application process. So if you don't sign that part, we will chase after you to make sure that you do truly understand. And then on the next slide, this is just showing you how to upload your CEO statement of support. Answering the questions, we suggest that you do that in advance of submitting your application, to write out your answers in a Word document and then copy paste them into, because you cannot go start your application and then save the information and come back to it later. So it's best to go ahead and take a look at all of the questions, figure out what your responses are going to be, and then submit those questions via the online portal. Nikki, anything that you would want to add to that about the application before I get to the timeline?
I think
Great.
you covered everything. Just one thing, you can't go to the next section of the form without your signature. So don't worry, we don't have to hunt you down.
Perfect. Perfect. And then in terms of what our timeline looks like, our applications are now available on the website. Those will be due by March 19th. You're welcome to turn them in earlier. And then all candidates will be notified by April 2nd, because we want to make sure that you're able to hold those days on your calendar. But again, the days that we have set aside for training are also on the website. So you can go ahead and hold them on your calendar, make sure that you're available prior to submitting your application. But then we'll be sure to let you know those first couple of days of April to make sure that to keep those holds on your calendar. So as the slide says, be prepared with your attachment and your responses, since you cannot save, and then you'll receive a confirmation email from our team with our response. But our email addresses are on the last slide that we'll show in terms of direct email addresses for Nikki and myself. But the workforce@uschamber.com is also a way that you can get a hold of us. So that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, but just want to see, any questions, anything that we can answer for you all now as you think about taking these next steps with us in the TPM Academy.
just this is Jake Rao in Erie, Pennsylvania. Quick question relative to the 30. You mean 30? Your cohort is maxed out at 30 total participants. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason for that being, Jake, is because we like to get to know you guys, and we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to provide the technical assistance that's required as we go through an academy experience. So we try not to have too many going on at the same time, because we really want to make sure that we're able to provide you the support that you need as you go through this.
Okay. So let me ask you that and I don't mean to monopolize Jake again here. So I have a group of manufacturers that created their own collaborative to focus on talent pipeline, and they just didn't have the bandwidth. So they partnered with the chamber, and now we're taking, so it's about 20 manufacturers. Mm-hmm. And would that kind of already made group would that be a good foundation for which to kind of use the structure process that you're using to help get them actual results? I mean, like, work with them.
That's the perfect example, to be honest, because you've already got the buy-in and the willingness of the employers to participate. It's that they don't have, the conductor bringing them through the process. So we find that to be the case with most employers. And a lot of times our practitioners are coming in with a group of employers already in mind that they can kind of build off an existing initiative versus starting from scratch. Both can be successful, but I would say saves you time by already having this group of employers who want to do something. They just don't necessarily have the time necessary. So to have a chamber or an industry association or some type of business facing organization to help lead them through a structured process, that's what we usually hear from folks. They think of TPM as different from their previous experiences, is that it's structured. We give you the playbook. You're meant to customize it and make it meet your needs, but the playbook is there for you.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions that we can answer? Or Nikki, anything that I missed in the chat?
No, I think we answered all the questions in the chat, but really we want to make sure if they're questions specific to why you are thinking about TPM, that we can kind of help you think through before you start your application. I know a couple of you we've spoken to over the last year or so about your interest in TPM. A few of you are coming from organizations or areas that already have TPM in place. And I'm going to say this for those who couldn't join us for the live session, but will be watching the recording. If as you're going through this process, you think about those things or how everything can connect, we're here always to answer those. You can start from scratch with really nothing already going, or you might be like Jacob, where you have some employers that really want to get started with something, but don't have the bandwidth or the framework to start moving through the process. So it is really flexible to whatever your needs are, and we're happy to help you think through how this works best for your community and how it can be implemented when you can't maybe physically bring everyone together too. We've seen some real successes, even in industries that you would think, well, you have to have those people at the table to make this work. People are figuring out ways to make this work and see real results even without being able to be physically together.
Yep, that's such a great point. And just one thing that I, want to help you guys understand, and in terms of the role that we at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce play for you, is we're your support. We bring you through this process. We help you all learn what TPM is meant to do and all of the inner workings of it. And then your job as what we would usually call the host organization, that's usually who goes through a TPM academy, not always, but most of the time, are the ones that are going to be bringing these employer groups together. It's always our job to make things a little bit easier for the next person. So we at the U.S. Chamber want to make your job as host organizations easier. Your job as host organizations is to make the work of the employers easier. So employers don't need to know how the sausage is made, as we like to say, in TPM. You're going to learn that. And sometimes some employers do want to know. They are interested and they are eager to really understand every little piece and specificity that goes into this process. Others are just like, let me know what you need from me and how I'm going to benefit from this. What's in it for me, right? With them. So we get all of that, and we've been through, we've been around the block a couple of times with this academy experience, and we want to make sure that you all are well equipped to be facilitators of those conversations, because employers are busy folks. They're getting pulled in a billion different directions. They don't have time to go through every piece of this process. So and we know that you are busy folks too. So we try to make your time with us very effective, and make sure that anytime we're going to meet together, it's for a reason. Just like anytime a host organization brings together an employer collaborative, it's for a reason, and there's going to be an outcome out of it. So just something I wanted to kind of help clarify.
So I've gotten a couple questions in the chat, and the first one is, how many cohorts do we have a year, and will this be offered again next year around the same time? And that is a great question. So I'd say each year we've added about one more cohort than we've done the year prior. So this past year we did 5. And part of that is because there is a lot of kind of personal touches, I'd say, right? It's really practitioners and our faculty members, our staff that are teaching. We're building these cohorts, these networks across the US and Canada. And so there is that kind of component that doesn't necessarily allow for you to do this at scale. But as I say that, that's part of the reason why we're developing this online on-demand platform. So our hope is that that will allow for more people to be able to go through the process at a self-paced kind of timeline in future years. As far as having this cohort around, or a national academy around the same time next year, we'll likely have 1 or 2 national cohorts next year, but timing will be dependent on when we start to see there being a mass interest to move forward with another national cohort. So hopefully that answered your questions. The next question I see is related to the employer collaborative project. Is there an expectation that those in this cohort are establishing employer collaboratives in real time as part of this training in their localities? That's a great question, Leah. So no, there's no expectation that this is going to be a collaborative that's going to be stood up in real time in your region or community. I think if the members of the small group decide, hey, one of our, and we have seen this, one of our group members is at a place where they are ready to move forward with standing up their employer collaborative, and we can provide that support in developing what that framework looks like, that's great. But this can really be based on whatever you all decide you want it to be. So it can be theory or it can be real world application, but we want to give you the opportunity to really think through all the steps of the process and have that kind of tactile component of it before moving into actually having to do it on your own, because this gives you the safe space essentially to make all the flubs you want and figure out how to do it before you want to bring it forward to the people that really matter. We're your team to get the presentation right.
And we'll be bringing together members of the National Learning Network to provide some mentorship. We, of course, will also be technical support. So as you all are kind of going through that, yes, it's taking theory to implementation, but hypothetical implementation before you would be kind of released into the wild. Some of you, may be implementing. Perhaps you're a part of an organization that already has TPM, and you're now going to be taking the reins and leading employers through that process. And that's perfectly fine too. As we said, this is an agile framework, and our facilitation is also agile in that we're here to support you and meet you where you're at. Any other questions from folks? All right, hearing none, we'll give you a couple minutes back to your lunch hours on the East Coast. And for those of you on the West Coast, thanks for joining us this morning. We're really grateful and excited for the opportunity to bring together a new batch of TPM Academy participants. Hopefully this is just the first time that we get to talk to you all in this type of setting and context, and we look forward to receiving your applications and reviewing them. So I know that Nikki had included in the chat the website. Please make sure that you are in touch with us if you do have any questions or anything that we can help you with as you think about filling out that application. We are happy to send